sure that's not.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the January board. Can I make a particular welcome to our two new board members, Liz Sace and John Oldham. Really welcome. Good to have you on board. We have an apology from Paul Rue, who is ill. Paul, if you happen to be spending your sick leave watching this, I hope the discussion makes you feel better. Are there any declarations of interest that anybody needs to make? Okay, that's good. Minutes of our meeting of the 19th of December, are they a true and accurate record of everything we discussed? Excellent, thank you. They are therefore approved. Matters arising, there's an action log, and they are either all in progress or have been done, so I don't think there's anything we need to raise now, if people are content. And that takes us, David, to your report, please.
Okay, thanks, Peter. I wonder if thank you. I wonder if I could almost start at the end of the report and then jump back to the top of it. So do two things at the beginning. Firstly is just to say that now at 11 o'clock, the news of the announcement of the appointment of Kirsty Shaw as the Chief Operating Officer for CQC will go out. Kirsty will join us on the 1st of March, I understand. So I have to say, Peter and I did the appointment together. I think she was an outstanding candidate, and I've got great optimism about the contribution she'll make. So this is taking over substantially the role that Eileen did, but slightly tweaking the role to give a greater focus on the overall performance of the organisation and helping in that. So really pleased to be able to make that announcement. And then I just want publicly to congratulate Andrea on her CBE in the New Year's Honours list. I'm sure many in the board would support that. And I know, as she says, Twitter has exploded. I don't quite know what that means. It couldn't explode far enough as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, it has exploded, I think, in a nice way, which is great. And I think it's for recognition of what Andrea has done for us at CQC, and I think reflects well on the directorate, but I think it's also for your public service career as well. So many congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
So if I could dive to the top of the report now, there's a performance report. Welcome. There's a performance report which I think we're now getting into the tradition of the Chief Inspectors beginning to introduce this, and Kate will do the money bit on this, but I think Andrea is going to kick off because the first bits are on registration. Okay.
Thank you. So just to look at the performance report and just to pull out 3 items for you, although obviously there may well be other questions that you would want to ask. The first is on registration, and to note that our activity continues to increase, and it's slightly awkwardly worded in the report, but hopefully you can kind of see the sense of it, which is that from each quarter throughout this year we have seen an increase in activity, and that obviously puts pressure on the team in terms of hitting the timeliness targets, but we are continuing to be better performing than last year in our timeliness targets. Dipped a little bit in November, but there is a kind of a rhythm of this in terms of how it goes. So I would like to kind of commend the team for their continued effort to improve. Clearly, the work that we are doing around the processes and procedures to strip out some of the bureaucracy around this, which will help to speed up our timeliness. Also looking at the work that we're doing with the digital team to support the registration team, both within my directorate, but obviously the very important bit of registration that happens in NCSC. as well. So we will continue to see kind of improvement over the next 2 years, but just wanted to draw that out and to make the point about the increased activity. The second area is in adult social care inspection, and just to reflect that we have had significant turnover and vacancies within the team there, and that has impacted on our capacity. But what has also impacted on our capacity to go to the services that we said that we would go to within certain time periods has been prioritising risk. So we are returning to our inadequates and requires improvements in the main within the 6 and 12 months that we said that we would, but unfortunately we're not getting back to the goods and outstandings within the 2 years that we said that they would in all cases. We are in some, because we are responding to the risks that have been raised with us. And you can see in the report that of the goods services that we are going back to, 23% of them are deteriorating, 20% to requires improvement and 3% to inadequate, and that is on slide 8. And that obviously puts pressure on the team in terms of we weren't expecting that level of deterioration in terms of the activity, and generally, and particularly those that are dropping down to inadequate, usually means that there is enforcement action that's happening there as well, which is an increase of activity for the team too. So again, just wanted to highlight that. And last but not least is on the reports, and we continue to make progress towards getting to the 90% within the key performance indicator target of getting reports out within 10 weeks and 50 days. And the team are continuing to do that. We are monitoring that carefully, particularly monitoring how long it's taking us to get outstanding and inadequate reports out, which is where there is obviously a significant level of scrutiny, and sometimes, particularly on the inadequate side of things, a significant level of challenge. But the teams are receiving weekly reports identifying where the delays are, where the outliers are, and inspectors and inspection managers are following those up to make sure that we do that as quickly as possible.
So should we just pause there? Is any questions for or comments for Andrea? Lewis?
I do have a question, but it's not specifically for Andrea, but it is on the issue that you just raised. Just a couple of things, if I can. On the issue of the change in ratings, which I think is an interesting phenomenon of where, on the whole, there's a sense that ratings get better on re-inspection. There is also quite a variation, and the variation is across sectors, and it applies to more or less all the ratings. So the outcome, although I think we can be reasonably positive about what happens next, the variation is enough for us to wonder why. And I just wonder whether we've now got, across all the sectors, not just in social care, so this isn't specifically about social care, we've now got enough examples for us to draw some broader improvement conclusions, or for that matter, deterioration conclusions. So in other words, what is it that allows a trust or a care home to improve? And what is it that prevents that, and what is it that leads to a deterioration after we've made a rating? And in the improvement science that we're trying to get to, we may have better data than more or less anybody, I would say. So I'm just keen that we use that. I have a couple of other points, but I can hold on to them unless you want to.
Yeah, well, let's just answer that. Ted, you looked as if you were happy to...
You can go first, Ted.
I'll go first. I was going to highlight that actually when I came to reporting back on the hospital's performance, because there is a continuing trend of our trust ratings improving, as you say. But it is mixed, and some are getting worse, but actually the majority are improving. And that is encouraging. And I think, first of all, it's a great tribute to hospitals working under enormous pressure that they are driving improvement. And I think we need to recognise the amount of work that's going on in these organisations to do that. And it's a great tribute to the staff, but also the management. I think the factors behind it were reflected in our report last July, driving improvement, and everything we've seen since has confirmed the conclusions of that report, that this is about leadership, it is about culture, it is about staff engagement, and it's about effective governance. And I think that turns organisations round. And increasingly we are seeing organisations learning from that and developing their own quality improvement cultures. And I've been to several organisations recently where this is very much what's driving it. And those are the organisations that are really changing. And I'd highlight, just this last week, we published a report on Royal Berkshire Hospital. It was RI when we published a last report 2 or 3 years ago. It is now good, and it is very high good. The Royal Berkshire Hospital itself, the site has come out as outstanding, and that is a great tribute to an organisation working under pressure, delivering real improvement. And if you talk to the staff, they'll say the culture in this organisation has really changed in the last 2 years. And that is a result of our report, and I think is very positive for them.
Andrea?
And to follow up on that, on the in adult social care, we're following the lead that hospitals gave us around the driving improvement report that we published last year, and doing a similar exercise in looking at 12 case studies of services that have improved from requires improvement, inadequate and requires improvement upwards. And we'll be producing a report later this year, hopefully in May, demonstrating that. And again, I think that very similar issues will come out to what we saw in hospital trusts, but it'll be interesting to see if there are any variations or any kind of nuances from an adult social care perspective. So we are doing that work to mine into that data, and also to do it on the basis of conversations with the organisations themselves, so the registered managers, their teams, and people who are using services, to find out what's happened there. So we'll be able to do something similar to what Ted's team did last year. The second thing on deterioration, I do think that 2 things. One, there probably is more work that we can do. I mean, I think we are sitting on an amazing evidence base of what are the factors that kind of cause that. And, there are conversations that we're having with Malta's team in terms of, how can we use the qualitative tools that we've now got that can actually look into the text of the reports and pull out some of those messages. But I do think it is reflecting what we have spoken about in the last 2 state of care reports around the fragility and the precarious nature of the adult social care market. And we are seeing concerns around staffing, and particularly nursing in nursing homes, and that impacting on safety and on leadership. And again, I think that it's those factors which, if we did kind of get into a much more thorough analysis of it, we would be seeing. And I think it is important for us to use that information to highlight what people need to be aware of, but what also ourselves and the rest of the system needs to be aware of in terms of the things that we need to do to improve.
Steve?
Thanks. Just to add to that, the figures for this says primary care, but it's really general practice we're talking about, because they're the ones, the majority of those that are rated. It doesn't include the majority of our locations, which actually are in dentistry, if you look at by volume, because they're not rated. Of the GP ones, this data, I think, is as accurate as we can get it, apart from the fact there are a number of surgeries which cease to trade or merge or are taken over. So these are based on going back to locations we've already been to. What we need to do is some more work to give you the figures on the takeovers, mergers, etc. And it is quite fluid, and we are finding some deterioration in some areas more than others. So I think there's a richness in the data. The numbers are still quite small, but as the summer goes on, we'll have something quite interesting to look at, I think.
So David and then Liz.
You raised, again, a really important point, Lewis. And I think you chaired RGC yesterday, where Paul had some slides in relation to deterioration in return inspections in mental health. And if you look, I think I'm right in my figures, I think it's 23 and 25% of those services we go back and we've inspected over the past 12 months or so are actually showing some deterioration when we go back, not improvement. And I think this is something we need to keep vigilant at, because from those comprehensive inspections, as Ted has outlined, there was a really good performance on particularly inadequates improving. But what we're now facing is some goods that have deteriorated and declined. And I think we need to understand not just why places that requires improvement have got better, which was the subject of the publication. But what is the challenge of holding that level of performance at that level rather than deteriorating? And I think this plays to the risk register conversation we had earlier this morning, and I think it's behind Robert's question for me about what is the oversight of these services. The challenge, I think, for us is because of the risk base, we're going back to those services we're the most worried about at the minute. And therefore, there's almost, you'd be better at this than I am by a long way, there'll be an inevitability that if you're going back to those that you're most worried about, you are going to find something. But I think it is something we need to continue to keep under quite close scrutiny to try and understand. We did say it in quite a transparent way, I thought, on the State of Care report in October, and I'm not sure it got picked up. I think there's a particularly dominant narrative running at the minute about services, the NHS in particular, about money, and actually there's something, I think, which is quite important that sits under that narrative about those that are improving, and a number are, as Ted has said, but there are some declining, and why is it that they're declining, and what is it, and what do we understand? And I, for one, wouldn't like to actually give a definitive view about why things are deteriorating, but I think we do need to understand that. And that comes on to the predictive stuff that we were talking about earlier that you were raising and Peter's talked about as well. So I think it's a hugely important question.
So, Liz.
Yes, thanks very much. I wanted to ask about in the report, there's a comment that warning notices are going down and criminal actions are increasing. And I suppose I wanted to understand, is this a shift in our own policy in terms of how we're using the powers at our disposal, and or is it that there's a change in the numbers of providers who are meeting a threshold for criminal interventions, and what the implications of whichever of those are for kind of impact of use of these powers in this way?
David, do you want to answer that question?
I think Andrew might be better.
Well, Andrew?
I think it's both, actually. I don't think it's either or. I think it's and. Yeah. So we are using the criminal powers, power to prosecute criminal investigations more. And I think we are reflecting on what is the impact of a warning notice, what's the change we're trying to get from issuing a warning notice and using those in a much more strategic and judicious way. So it's a bit of both, to be honest, Liz.
Do you want to add anything, Andrew?
I think that's right, and also on the criminal side of things, it's not just the kind of prosecutions; it's also use of fixed penalty notices for failure to display ratings and failure to have a registered manager in post, without kind of a sensible and good explanation, because as we know, that's absolutely critical in terms of the quality of care. So there's a variety of things that are covered in the criminal prosecution area, and David's absolutely right. What we're wanting to do is to make sure that we are using the most appropriate of our enforcement toolkit to enforce the improvement that we want to see, or indeed to hold providers to account for the poor practice that we have seen. And I think that we're also getting better, to be perfectly honest, we're also getting better at recording that information and presenting that back to the board and to the executive team as well.
Robert.
Just to follow on really from Steve's point about the figures conceal closures and reconfigurations and so on, and I wonder whether it would be helpful, not necessarily all the time, but we probably have access to what the figures are for an area, because one GP practice closes, there will be another, the patients will have gone somewhere else. And actually, what is the effect of our inspections and our general activity on the general standards of an area as measured by the cumulative numbers of goods that inadequate and requires improvement? Now, it's not as simple as I understand as counting up institutions or organisations, because it's more a question of how many patients are exposed to them. But I just wonder whether it would be worthwhile considering. We do that sporadically in terms of systems reviews or whatever, but whether it would be something we could look at on a more regular basis.
So I mean, we haven't spoken, but that's what I've just asked my team to do for next time for the GP side.
You can pay me later.
Because it is interesting when you look at London compared with some other areas. And also in general medical practice, if you look at the press, there are some areas of the country where the GPs are saying they're stopping taking additional patients on because of the pressure. Because if we've got a practice in that area which is failing, we then have to balance our enforcement activity to close a practice or to suspend a practice, even if they're really, really bad, in an area where the system is so stretched and there aren't any other providers. We have to work very closely with the CCGs and NHS England to try and ensure rapid action to improve the quality of care, whereas in other areas that might be different. So we work in a very sensitive way, and we've had to make some very difficult decisions over the last few years just because of that.
So, Lewis, about half an hour ago, you said you had 2 or 3 questions, so that was the first.
Well, the first is the other one's a comment in a way that about the presentation of the data, but it's on the same issue. It would be useful to see 2 refinements of the data. One is it would be useful to see the mental health contribution here separately from the hospitals as a whole, because as we were hearing yesterday, there is a mental health story. We were hearing that at RGC yesterday, and that it would be useful to see the mental health trusts listed separately on improvement and ratings and so on. And the same then applies to the special measures data. We used to say where special measures were being applied, which sectors, and of course there was a story there about the large number of social care providers and to some extent primary care actually, where almost all the special measures locations were. We don't have that anymore. We have a kind of flow diagram now which tells us who's coming in and out of special measures, but it doesn't tell us anymore where they are in terms of their sector, and I think that was quite a useful story. That's one thing. I've got one other thing, which is about the safeguarding data. This is you know which slide is this? It's on page 5, and it's about safeguarding. And I think it's the mandatory actions and notifications to local authorities, if I've understood correctly. So it's slide B. We're reporting as being below our KPI on this every month, and our performance generally doesn't look too bad because it's around about 90%, but it is consistently below our KPI. I just wondered whether that's something we should be considering more, whether there's a reason for that and could be doing more about that, given that we have the KPI.
David.
There's a bit of technical detail about this, Lewis, that I can't quite retrieve, if I'm being truthful. But I think what you'll see here is some improvement. But I'd want to come back to you, to be honest. I don't feel I'm sufficiently up to date on... Because if you look at the other stuff that's going on in NCSC, they've made really good progress on their improvements. And I don't know the backstory on why this one appears to be stuck at 89, 90%, and it's not really shifted over the past few months when everything else they've been doing up there has had a pretty generous... Do you know, Kate? Okay, there is a story.
Yeah, it's simply it's a cumulative figure. So it's a cumulative figure because they had difficulty when they were setting up the system earlier in the year. So it was quite low. So they're constantly playing catch-up, but they are actually achieving the target on a month-by-month basis now, and that's why.
To add something.
So
you need to plug yourself in.
The second thing that we've done, because as well as the NCSC data, we've had consistent performance issues at making that last 8 to 10% right across the organisation. So the Safeguarding Committee has done a sort of end-to-end review of the process, trying to work out whether there are process improvements we can make. And what we particularly discovered is at 2 or 3 steps there was a huge amount of duplication with double entry going on between those things which were generating safeguarding alerts and those things that were also generating notifications and concerns. And we agreed at the last Safeguarding Committee to strip that duplication out and create a much more streamlined process. And we believe that that will make a big difference because it will mean two things. One is that particularly in some of the high referral areas, particularly in adult social care, it will make a difference to the numbers of alerts and concerns that inspectors are needing to deal with on a daily basis. But more importantly, it will increase the sense and the confidence that if it comes through as a safeguarding alert or concern, there is something that needs to be done with it. At the moment, it's generated quite a lot of false negatives, and if we're quite honest, on a priority day, a sense from inspectors that there probably won't be anything there, and therefore they leave it. So the change of this will be to enable that focus. We've consulted staff about it, and we're just moving into the implementation, and we are confident that that will be hopefully an important building block in this step change to be able to reach that KPI.
Great, thank you, Ursula. Now, you may as well stay where you are because eventually it will be your turn. You might like to turn your microphone off. David, back to you.
So I think what should happen next is Ted and Steve will just give their update in relation to it, and then Kate will do the money. So go on.
Sorry, did you want to raise something?
I did. Thank you, Peter. I mean, it's a left field question, but it's something that's just playing on my mind as I listen to the conversation. We're talking about the ratings. Really, a lot of the rating changes to, say, requires improvement or inadequate are down to staff and staff numbers and resourcing and finding adequate staff, particularly in adult social care, and potential trust. And we also talked about sort of predictive and how to predict these things. And the left field question is really, one thing that we know is about to happen is Brexit. And that's going to have a huge impact on, potentially, depending on the type of Brexit we have. And we know it's going to happen. My question was really, is there any way of doing any form of impact analysis on what the effects on adult social care in particular, but potentially trusts as well, what the impact of this actually could be, and maybe looking at the different scenarios of what type of Brexit we could have and doing different impacts for the different scenarios.
Two or three things on that. One, you're absolutely right. We are already seeing the impact of Brexit on staffing, both in terms of the numbers of nursing staff from European countries coming onto the register and those that are leaving, and also availability of staff in adult social care at other grades. And that it's an issue for the health service, and it's a big issue for adult social care. There's actually twice as many people working in adult social care from European Union as there is in the health service. In terms of the analysis, the National Audit Office is currently doing a study on workforce in adult social care, and that's due to report later in the next couple of months, which I think will give a really good basis for consideration of these issues. And I also know that the Department of Health itself, from an adult social care point of view, because that's the system steward role sits with them for that, is looking at what the potential impact of Brexit might be and what the mitigating actions could be. I think my personal view on this is that we've not really bottomed all of that out, but we do need to be thinking very seriously about what the workforce strategy should be for adult social care going forwards, because I am personally very worried about what that impact is going to be.
Thanks. Ted.
Thank you. In terms of performance in hospitals, you'll see on slide 6 that the inspection activity is high and remains high. Now we're well into the next phase of hospital inspections, and that is generally progressing well. It isn't just about inspections, to remind you. It is also about building much stronger relationships with providers from ongoing relationship meetings. And I want to pay tribute to our staff who've adapted to the the new scheme of inspection, but also to working with trusts in a different way very effectively. And I've had some very strong positive feedback from trusts about how much they value the relationships that they're developing with their local CQC staff. The next phase, as I say, is well embedded, but we are not complacent, and I think we are endeavouring to learn and improve it, and we're building quality improvement methodology into the next phase going forward, because we see this as something not just that we do once and get right, but something we continuously improve. And that is going to feed into our ability to approach data in a different way and drive efficiency improvements going forward for the inspectors. The reports are now being published. We've been publishing our next phase reports, and we've already discussed some of the changes that we've seen in the ratings, and those changes have continued on the next phase report. So we're demonstrating that we can demonstrate changes in quality on next phase as we were on the previous comprehensive inspections. We mentioned earlier on about the number of trusts going from RI to good, which is really encouraging. But I should stress that there are a significant number of trusts, about an equal number, who requires improvement and are staying requires improvement on reinspection. Now, requires improvement to some extent was, if you like, the majority of trusts in the first round of inspections, and we are worried that some trusts are seeing that as a kind of comfortable place to be. And trusts have demonstrated that even in the present environment they can significantly improve their services, and that's what we're expecting to see in all trusts. So we are thinking through our approach to the trusts that are present stuck at requires improvement, which we don't think is a satisfactory place for them to be. For those that deteriorate to inadequate, of course, there's a special measures regime. And that is, I think, being very effective in turning trusts round. It takes a while, but trusts are turning round. And we took the latest trust out of special measures only a week ago. There are now 15 trusts still in special measures, and many of them are making progress. And I hope during this next few months we'll be able to recommend further trusts come out of special measures going forward. In terms of performance, going back to the performance issues again, it's important to stress that we're doing a lot of work on report timeliness. That is still a concern for us in hospitals. The next phase has been designed around very tight timescales, and I'm very grateful to our staff who are working to those, and we are delivering the next phase reports in a timely manner. We still have independent health provider reports that we are clearing a backlog of. So we haven't quite hit the KPIs yet, but a lot of work is going on, and the average time to production of reports is coming down. So I hope we will be able to demonstrate that we are achieving the KPIs in the very near future.
Thanks, Ted. Can we go to Steve, and then we'll open it up for comments and questions. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of issues. One of them was safeguarding, but Ursula, who's one of my deputies, has answered all of the... She anticipates things really well, so that's excellent. But there are systems issues, both in safeguarding and in how we look at the four-quarter breaches, which our new Director of Business Manager is taking as priority. And they involve the whole system through data input as well. I want to, as Ted said very well for his staff, congratulate our staff again for the continuing good progress towards publishing reports very quickly. It's something that's come up over the last few years for the whole of CQC at National Audit Office and Health Select Committees, and our performance is very good on that now, and it's pleasing to be able to say that at the same time as the staff survey for primary care is excellent, although we can do even better, but it is a really, really good response from our staff on that. We're going to talk about the pause of some inspections in another point later, I think. I'll keep it short.
Thank you, Steve. John.
Thank you. A question for Ted. There's a lot of reports this morning about younger nurses leaving the system, and I wondered if that was correlated at all in the sort of ratings and your inspections. And secondly, going back to the Brexit point, there's a 90% drop in application from EU nurses to come and work here, and those two things seem tricky. I wondered what your prediction might be going forward.
Workforce is one of the key pressures facing the NHS at the moment. It's workforce across all groups, but clearly nurses are the most common or the largest part of the workforce, and so there's a particular concern in that regard. I think when we started our comprehensive inspection regime several years ago, there were real concerns about the plans for staffing clinical areas, and we have to challenge those. But trusts, I think, have stepped up to that and are recognising the staffing they need, but they still have problems in recruiting staffing. And I think is a major challenge for trusts going forward. And there are very few trusts we go to who don't tell us that nurse recruitment is a real issue for them. A lot of the time they're filling gaps with agency and temporary staff, who may be very good staff, but inevitably because they are not permanent staff, they don't have that same continuity of care that permanent staff provide. Occasionally we see trusts that have difficulty filling shifts, and those are trusts where we sometimes have to take action over their staffing numbers, but they are working very hard to do that. In terms of going forward, I think one of my chief concerns is, and if you read some of the stories about the young nurses that you're talking about this morning, they talk about the pressures they work under, and they talk about the difficulties they work under. And I think it is very important that we focus on the support and well-being of staff. They are working under pressure, and we need to recognise that actually the staff need support if they're going to provide excellent care to their patients. I am still worried about the NHS staff survey. It still remains, and it's been stuck in that way for many years, with a high level of staff reporting bullying at work. And I think that is a real concern. In other services, I think it would be questioned. So I think when we look at staffing, some of it is about recruitment and the issues around Brexit and other staff recruitment, I think, is a question. But part of it is about retention and actually making staff enjoy and get satisfaction from their work. It is a great vocation working in the health service, and the greatest satisfaction you get is from that one-to-one interaction with patients and feeling you're making a difference to individual people's lives. But if you find you're working in an environment where it's very difficult to do that because of the pressures of the work you're under, then I think it is very difficult to draw that satisfaction. And I think we need to recognise the staff need support.
Robert.
Could I just say how much I agree with what Ted has just said, but and add that my understanding is that senior nurses are leaving as well, so there's a shortage in retention at that level, which of course is part of the knock-on effect of the quality of experience that junior nurses have because they're not getting the right support. My question is, a fair amount of, frankly, not entirely coordinated work is going on around the system about how we should improve recruitment, retention, the quality of life for staff. But I'm wondering what contribution the Care Quality Commission can make to that work, in particular by way of identifying the good practice that undoubtedly exists in some trusts who don't have quite as much of a problem as other places, to do those things which actually make life tolerable and indeed possibly even valuable for staff. I'm not talking about pay increases, I'm talking about the conditions in which many staff now have to work, in which they have no place to rest, no place to eat. Students, I learn, who have to pay for car parking spaces when they go to remote sites and don't actually get any reimbursement in relation to that. All these sort of little things, they sound little in terms of money, but they actually are extremely important to the people who work in the system. And unless something is done about this, I'm persuaded that things are only going to get worse, leaving aside the huge challenges of Brexit, immigration, control policies and so on.
Well, I would support everything you said there, Francis. It is making staff feel valued, but also giving them support in actually doing their job, recognising the difficulties of their job. So some of it is some of those, if you like, peripheral things that actually make their working lives easier, but it's also the culture in which they work. And we've seen many trusts where there is still a blame culture. If things go wrong, the frontline staff get blamed. Well, clearly that is a difficult environment in which to work, and staff need to be, if you like, drawn into a culture where they feel positive and supported and encouraged to do good work. If you look at our outstanding hospitals, those with really embedded quality improvement cultures, you'll find the staff there, the staff recruitment issues there are much less. I'm not saying they don't face challenges, because the whole system faces challenges, but there's one of those hospitals I was talking to a few days ago, and they were saying they'd set themselves the goal of having no agency nurses whatsoever, which is a great achievement for a hospital in the NHS at the moment, but that is very real for them and achievable. And I think there's an awful lot more that hospitals can do in terms of culture and staff engagement and effective leadership that will make a real difference to their recruitment and retention of staff. It will not solve the problem because there is a genuine shortage, but it will make the best of where we are. And I think at the moment we are not making the best of where we are because we are not creating a working environment and a working culture that people feel supported in.
Good. David, can we come back to the rest of your report, please?
Yep. Right. Thank you. I'm now going to go on to paragraph 2 of my report, and this is a brief update in relation to digital and intelligence. It's pointing out 2 things. We continue to work on IMS3. That's the platform we're on that we share with NHS England, the Department of Health. And we updated you on this in December, and this is just to say that those conversations continue to go forward. And following the board meeting in December, the focus of activity has really been about developing the business plan, which was an item that we considered earlier today, particularly in relation to digital. And then the second issue was the commercial activity to secure some of the skills that we need to introduce into the organisation to make sure that we're well placed to take that forward. So that work continues. I meet with Peter and Andrew and Helen on a weekly basis on a Monday, just for half an hour to check where we're up to. So I can give the board some reassurance that there's a huge amount of focus on that activity. Paragraph 3 is the decision that we took within the organisation to pause routine inspections. I think there's a question from Mr Ward in relation to this that has been placed as well, so anticipating this. What I've tried to do in this paragraph is just to explain the decision that we made, and it was to pause routine inspections in hospitals and some inspections in primary medical services. And these were for those services that we'd rated good or outstanding previously. And if they were scheduled to have a routine inspection during January, that we wouldn't go ahead with that routine inspection in light of the pressure that hospitals were under in respect of norovirus and influenza. If a trust had been rated requires improvement or inadequate, or there'd been a concern that had been referred to us that we were equally concerned about and we were intending to bring forward an inspection, those inspections would continue. So this wasn't a moratorium or a pause on inspections. It was an attempt to apply a risk stratification to the activity that we were going to undertake. That was a conversation, to go to Mr Ward's first question, who made the decision. That was a conversation that we began on Monday, a couple of weeks ago, and we worked at that through the executive team on Monday and Tuesday. We checked the data, we looked how many inspections. It is less than a handful of trust inspections. Ted will give you a number, I think, but I think it's less than 5. And we published that decision in a letter that I signed on the Thursday of that week. So over a 4-day period, we actually had the discussion and we looked at the pros and the cons. We looked at how many inspections this would affect on the inspection programme and took the decision. Effectively, it was an executive team decision. I take responsibility for that. It was my name that went on the letter, and I stand by the judgment that we made in relation to this. In relation to PMS, one of the interesting phenomena that I think we've had, and Steve might comment on this as well, Peter, was that You know we have specialist advisors on our inspections. These are GPs, these are serving GPs, and a number of GPs said they couldn't do the inspection which was programmed during January because of the level of flu, and they couldn't afford to be away from their surgery and get the cover in because of they'd got pressure that they'd got back in their practices that they needed to be. So in a sense, we were trying to balance the impact that inspections have on the places we go to, but we're also cognizant of and sensitive to the fact that some of the people we needed wouldn't be released from their inspections to do some of this stuff. So we were trying to ease that pressure as well, because we did need specialist advisors on those inspections we were going to go back to do because they were requires improvement or inadequate. We were not stepping back from doing those inspections. So it was a balance between impact on the services we were regulating and also the supply of particularly specialist inspectors that we've got. Our sickness rates haven't gone inordinately high within CQC. We do have some sickness rate, but we're not inordinately high. So, so they influence the decision. In terms of external influences on that decision, I think is one of your questions, Mr. Wood. There were no external decisions whatsoever. I got up on Saturday morning, looked at the press, thought about this, which tends to sadly what I do on Saturday mornings, think about the week that we've had and the week that's coming up, and so is there a contribution we can make to ease some of the pressure that people feel they're under at the present time without stepping back from doing our core responsibility, which is to provide public assurance about the quality of health and care? I can honestly say that nobody outside of CQC had any conversation with me, nor have they had any conversation with me in the lead up to that. So if this was, were we pressured by anybody, the answer is categorically no. And as I say, we then had a conversation within the organisation. Ted had the heads of inspection coming in to see him on the Monday. It was an opportunity to take an absolutely bang-up-to-date position from the heads of inspection. Steve spoke to the DCIs and heads of inspection during Monday and Tuesday. Andrea went away and talked to her people, her management. So this was an informed position that we took, Peter. I think your third question, Mr. Ward, which was why was the decision made? The decision was made to balance the impact on people providing services where they are dealing with norovirus and influenza, as well as the surge in winter, but also to accommodate how we could ensure that those inspections that we needed specialist advisors, we've got those specialist advisors available to us. We've got to remember a significant number of our hospital and GP inspections in particular, specialist advisors are a crucial part of that team that goes into a hospital. And if they're serving practitioners, which is a position we've been trying to move to, not time expired retired practitioners, and that's an issue about credibility, then there is going to be a pull on their time. About are they present in the delivery of service or are they present on inspections? So as I say, we weren't stepping back from doing inspections, but we were trying to get some accommodation. And if the board remembers, Naomi helped me with this, but when the junior doctors dispute was on, we also took a similar kind of approach on the junior doctors because of the pressure that hospitals were under providing cover. And if you remember, it was consultants that were doing the frontline cover during the junior doctors' strikes to ensure that was on. And we did have some conversation again then about what the intensity of our inspection programme should be, where we did do some scaling back in light of that. And again, they were marginal, they were very small numbers, but we did try and make some accommodation to it. I don't know what the non-executive colleagues are going to say in relation to this, but one of the learning points from this is, should we adjust our inspection programmes over the winter period to allow for the workforce supply issue, the skill supply issue that we need in acknowledgement? Because as Ted has said to us on many occasions, winter comes round every year, and it comes for us as well. So there is an issue about how we just provide accommodation to this, whilst continuing to provide assurance. So I've gone on a bit more, Peter, just to anticipate Mr. Ward's question, because he asked three questions about who made the decision, was there any influence on it, and who and why did we do it. So I hope that's done that as well, and I think there might have been non-exec members that wanted to raise similar points as well.
So just before we open it up, can I just say, David, I mean, you rightly said this was a decision taken by the executive team, but I reassure the board that I was fully aware of it. I mean, so it was, as you always do, keep me fully informed, and I fully support it. Ted, just again, before we open it up, I think it would be quite helpful if you just talk about the role of the relationship managers. I mean, you were talking about that earlier, but I think in this context it's really important.
Well, this has been reported in some sectors as we're stepping back from risk, and that's absolutely not what we're doing, and I think it's very important to stress that. The next phase of inspection methodology, which I've already discussed, it was designed to be flexible and agile and respond to events rather than be planned 6 months in advance. And this is the first opportunity for us to demonstrate that. And I've been impressed by the way that our staff have actually focused on that. We are not standing back from inspecting services under pressure if we believe there is risk to safety and quality for patients. Indeed, we will probably be inspecting in January just as much as we're going to. We may be inspecting in different areas, focusing on different things, depending on the risks we identify. And we have been inspecting emergency departments under pressure over the last 10 days or so. We've issued enforcement action against at least 2 services in the last week or so because of concerns. And we will go on focused on services under pressure. We want to be supportive, and I think it's very important to recognise the staff in the front line are doing a great job in delivering care. They are working under pressure. They've been put in a position where they have a lot of work coming in with the extra flu and norovirus, etc., as David has mentioned, and they have great difficulty in finding beds for patients. And so they are working under enormous pressure. We want to support them. We don't want to do anything to undermine them, but equally we want to ensure that patients are kept safe. And we will be going forward with a plan to inspect any emergency departments where we find there's evidence either from intelligence or from data that suggests that patients have been put at risk in those departments. But I think I should pay tribute to the staff working in emergency departments at the moment and in acute medical services. They're working under pressure, and I think the planning that's gone into winter has been highly effective in making sure they are maintaining as good quality care as they could. You will remember that we wrote to chief executives in September to tell them what we thought were the essential elements of safety built on what we'd learned from the good and outstanding A&E departments in the country. And I think those factors are being taken into account on the ground, and we will ensure where they're not being taken into account, we take action.
Steve and then
yeah.
Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Just to build on David and Ted's points, I mean, we were having a debate within our team at the same time David was having his Saturday morning coffee and read of the papers, and so actually we came in on Monday morning. Okay, we came wanting to have this discussion as a team as well, and I just want to sort of slightly redress the balance of reporting in that when you read the papers, it's all about hospitals, it's all about A&E. Actually, most care in the NHS is provided by GPs and the nurses in primary care. And actually, most of the pressure for winter is on general medical practice. You read about A&E departments, but actually, where you've got GPs working harder, many GPs are doing longer hours, seeing more patients to keep the pressure off A&E departments. But you only see the reporting from hospitals. And I'd like to, on record, pay tribute and add to Ted's tribute to the staff in A&E, to the GPs and the staff who are going the extra mile to try and keep the pressure off and keep people where they should be, which is at home. We were having some issues around spas having to cancel inspections at short notice because of either illness or, as David quite rightly said, were wanting to provide care for their patients. And so we were reviewing what was happening, and for us, it was an important decision in order to focus the resource we had on those practices we were worried about. And for this affects now 101 practices we have postponed the inspections of. None of those we're acutely worried about from a risk point of view, but we've reallocated spas to focus on those we are. 30 of those practices have been rescheduled already, and we're pushing 71 of the good, outstanding practice reviews back to next year to Q1 because we're not worried. It was just part of our ongoing programme. The feedback has been really supportive, but again, with Ted and David saying as well, we are not doing this at risk to patients. It is reallocation of resources. And because of the heterogeneity of primary medical services, it does mean we can use different SPAs and our inspections teams to look at independent providers and others. Therefore, we can reallocate and keep the productivity up as well.
Lewis.
Thanks. I should say, first of all, that I think, on balance, it was the right decision. But it is on balance, because I think there are some other considerations as well. It obviously runs the risk, when we're talking about our relationship with the providers, that we're focused on that to a degree which where patient experience at a particularly difficult time for the NHS is outweighed by our concern to do the right thing by the providers, and that's the way in which it could be interpreted, and I think to some extent is the way it might have come across in some places. So in other words, you could argue that this is the time when our scrutiny should have increased. This is the time when the system was under greater pressure, when patient experience might have deteriorated. This wasn't a one-off. This was a predictable and potentially a period of several weeks, not just a period of a couple of weeks. Even in the trusts that were rated as good, it may be that those are the trusts we should be most interested in, because they are the ones where the deterioration might be greatest. We don't know. So although I support the decision, I think it's very important that we now do the right thing in understanding patient experience during this difficult time for the NHS. And so I think we should be looking for a greater scrutiny through other means. So how we use data, how we relate to the trusts. And expect a comment on this specific issue, that we should be prepared to tell patients and the public how patient experience was affected where possible. So a piece of work which would correct any false impression that we got the balance wrong. And that might include some of the specific incidents. I mean, we hear almost every day there's a particular incident that's happened somewhere, which is said to reflect the pressure that particularly A&E departments are under, although I accept it's not just A&E departments. And in my field, there was one particular incident, a patient who, it was reported, died, fatal overdose, in an A&E department. I think that was in Worcestershire. So the question for us, I think, is have we followed that up? Are we collecting, are we looking at what was actually happening in that A&E department when that happened, when that incident occurred, and so on. So I think there's a requirement on us now to provide a sort of compensatory increase in scrutiny, even though it might not be by inspection. I just want some reassurance that we'll be doing that.
Ted, I don't know if you want to quickly respond to any of that.
Well, just to repeat what I said a few minutes ago, we have increased our focus on A&Es under pressure, and we'll continue to do so. And that particular case you highlighted, we are following up.
So, I mean, my own perspective is, very briefly, is two things. One, our whole strategy is to be risk-based and intelligence-led, and I think this is exactly what we've been doing. And secondly, just to slightly change the impression, Lewis, you might have left there, that we need a compensatory activity, because I think the compensatory activity, as Ted and Steve have both said, is actually we've been moving our resource to where we have the greatest concern. So it's not that we haven't been doing anything, it's just that we've been doing it in different places. And I think that's a really important message to get across. That was all I was going to say, but Robert, go on, you were going to say something.
Well, agreeing with a lot of what Lewis has said, and indeed what Ted has said, I understand the reasons behind this decision, but it prompts for me a number of questions. Well, the first is, if it be the case that at a time of maximum pressure, the way we undertake an inspection, if we did it, would actually make the situation worse rather than better, then are we considering, Lewis I think has made this point, but I'm putting it in a different way, are we considering how we can visit places to see what's actually going on in a way which doesn't produce that pressure, but at the same time protects patients. For example, we hear of reports of 20-plus ambulances outside some hospitals. We hear reports of elderly people in corridors, sometimes on the floor or not even on trolleys. It seems to me that our staff, inspectors, our representatives, should be in such places in order to see what is going on, and the public really require that. That's the first point. The second point is that the premise behind this decision is that our assessment of risk is sufficiently good to enable us to identify the places we need to go to do just what I've described. And on what basis do we know that our intelligence, the information we gather in real time, is good enough to enable that to happen? And my third point is that if we don't apply the same criteria to the good and outstanding places, some of whom will have been given that rating now some time ago, and actually their rating may not have related to any observation about how they deal with this sort of pressure, should we be not going to visit them for two reasons? One is they may not be as good as we think they are, but actually perhaps just as importantly, they may be as good as we thought they were. They may be showing exactly, and we know there are some hospitals which, despite all these pressures, have not cancelled elective operations, have not been having huge waiting times at A&E and so on. So why aren't we actually not wasting their time going there to trumpet their achievements?
I mean, I think you make a really good point, Robert, in that inspection is by far and away not the only contact we have with a hospital or visit. I mean, Ted, you and colleagues and even I am in hospitals quite regularly. So.
I think that's right. And just to reassure Robert, there are lots of informal visits go on that are not inspections. And clearly, we want to build relationships with organisations and for them to be honest with us about their problems. And we visit them regularly. And this last week, our teams have been doing informal visits to A&Es just to see what's going on without trying to inspect them. So in a sense, we are doing what you ask, and we are also in touch with ambulance trusts about any particular delays, so they can identify where they feel particular pressures are in the system as well, and that will inform our approach to individual services. So I think we are trying to do that. I mean, we can't be everywhere all the time. And the situation in an emergency department can change hour by hour. So inevitably we cannot see everything that goes on. But what I would stress, and I think it's important that we get this message across, if you read our reports from emergency departments over the whole year, you will see elements of this. The system is under pressure at the moment, and that's particularly so. But we've been reporting our concerns about emergency departments throughout the year. And you'll see reports from the summer where supposedly emergency departments aren't under winter pressures, where we found unsatisfactory and unsafe care and taken action as well. So it's important that we don't just accept that winter is the problem and the rest of the year everything is well.
So Jane, very quickly then, I think we need to move on. Microphone.
Health Watch enter and review. That's what we do. We are there when the inspectors go home, and I'm just tapping a note to my staff saying what actually did happen with that hospital there. So there are. That's a very light way of going in, and can be very effective. So,
David, back to this.
Thank you. I think the conversation just captures exactly what the exec team went through on the pros and cons, and you've just rehearsed what we did over the 4 days that we were having the conversation. If it's any consolation, and on balance, that's where we got to. And so I'm grateful for the conversation. If I could just go very briefly, Peter, to paragraph 4 in my report, which I think I'm telling the board what you already know in relation to the powers to rate independent healthcare providers and the work we've done over the summer and the publication in January of the Department of Health's outcomes of their consultation on this proposal. But I want to take the opportunity just to clarify something which I think has been a bit muddied and a bit opaque, which is we do have new powers, but those new powers do not give us the ability for CQC to rate health applications, apps, or websites. And it's quite important because I think there's a narrative out there at the minute that we do that. We do not do that. What we do is we rate the services that people might access through an app, not the app itself. And what we're trying to say in this very final paragraph of this is that we've begun to do some work with other arm's length bodies who have oversight of some of those services to make sure that there's absolute clarity between the organisations about what the respective responsibilities are. And then just going back to partly the conversation we've had, Peter, that the public can't take an assurance that we are looking at these things when we're not. It is the importance of the assurance we give, I think, which is the point that Lewis was, I think, getting at behind his question. And that's what we want to do. I'm not going to do the publications. You can read those, and we've covered the appointments. So if I conclude the report there, Peter, thank you.
Great. So we're running horribly late, but I really do want to spend the time that we've allocated, Ursula, to the Health and Justice report. Is Nigel outside? Oh, Nigel's there. Sorry, beg your pardon. Nigel, join us. So I don't know who's going to kick off.
I'll kick off and then...
Put your microphone on, please.
Yeah. So the first thing is just to thank the board for this opportunity to come and talk to you about the work that the team, the Children's Health and Justice team, have been doing for many years. And as well as, I think, just raising the profile, perhaps, of some of those areas that CQC is responsible for and some of our ways of working that perhaps haven't had as much attention while we've been focusing on some of the core comprehensive inspection programme over recent years. But also because I think they highlight some of the work that we do in support of some of the most vulnerable populations, whether that's vulnerable children, those looked after, people detained in the secure estate for a whole range of reasons, those in immigration detention centres as well as those in prisons and secure facilities for young people. I hope the report demonstrates some of the work that we do in partnership with other bodies, and again, as we look forward in some of the other presentations I know you've had around the local system reviews about, in a sense, us as CQC with others modelling partnership in regulation and assessment in the same way as we hope to see that sort of partnership in terms of how those systems are working together. And this team, in relation to their work, whether it's with Ofsted or Her Majesty's Inspector of Prisons and Constabulary and Probation, have been doing this work for some time and have been, over the last year or so, particularly sharing internally with the local systems review team and others some of our learning in those areas. I hope what the report also does is highlight some of our successes and particularly our impacts, which aren't only through the individual work that we do within local areas, the feedback that we get from SEND inspections from individual prisons about the impact that our work has through our reporting and regulatory action, but some of our highly impactful thematic reviews, again, often done in partnership with other agencies and on areas like domestic violence, child sexual exploitation, and misuse of substances in the secure estate, and being asked to contribute through things like the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. We were asked to present evidence and go back subsequently to some informal sessions offering advice on the recommendations, much to the credibility of my friend Nigel here. I think there are a couple of things that are really important to that success. I think one thing that we do in our methodology, which isn't routinely shared by some of the other methodologies in CQC, is the use of case tracking. And people find the powerful messages that we get out of tracking a child right the way through the system gives a real granularity and really helps both local systems and us in our thematic review to identify where were those real pinch points and critical moments, sometimes where opportunities were maximised for improvement and sometimes where opportunities were lost. And I certainly know we're having a conversation with some of the other teams who do some of this work. Although it's a little bit labour intensive, I think there is a real cost-benefit equation to have for it when judiciously applied in those areas where you're really trying to get underneath what is going on and what is the impact in terms of that is happening. And I know that Nigel would want to say that in areas, for example, the SEND inspection programme has been really powerful, I think, in capturing some of that stuff, and has been reflected back to us on occasions where it's the first time sometimes local stakeholders have got together to prepare for the evil inspection, and actually have carried on having conversations afterwards because they recognised how useful it was to join up some of those relationships across the system. In line with other parts of CQC, we share some common challenges. I think the board will not be unsurprised to know that in terms of what's going on within local authorities and systems, children's services are under immense pressure currently, and we certainly know that the prison estate is under a great deal of pressure. There are real opportunities to be working in partnership with Her Majesty's Inspector to Prisons, although sometimes bringing together a lead inspectorate with a statutory regulator that has its challenges in terms of how the powers sit and how we maximise some of those opportunities. But I think if our colleagues were here, they would say that those relationships, again, have really strengthened over the last couple of years, and we will shortly be meeting again with Peter Clark, Steve's opposite number as Chief Inspector, to discuss how we continue to take forward those relationships, particularly where we've got those complex situations of NHS trusts and other providers working into to the secure estate with not all of the levers then to be able to deliver services in the way that they would like to. And the big example at the moment is shortage of prison officer and other staff able to escort patients to the services and appointments that they need to go to. Really complex about where you hold that to account. Through the provider, who on the one hand is failing to deliver services, but it's another partner that is not enabling that to happen. And how, again, do we speak that truth to power in terms of what it is that's really causing that pressure in the system? What should our expectations be of providers in those circumstances about how they are responding and flagging some of those risks, while not getting into situations of blaming them and holding them to account for that, for which it is very difficult for them to be accountable. I propose to stop there. Nigel, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, I think that's just covered everything that I think I would have covered. I think, just to emphasise, I think that the team that carry out these inspections, they're a national team, very specialist in nature. They're quite intensive inspections. And I think if you looked at the staff survey results, you'll see that both teams were amongst the most positive results in the Commission. And I think that reflects, I think, the value that they get from these inspections. They see that the inspections we do and the nature of these inspections have great value. And as a consequence of that, I think that's why we saw such quite spectacular results in the staff survey. I think the other comment I'd make really is that I think it's taken us a long time to have our foot really in the door in relation to the joint inspection work. It's quite a different. We're working with inspectorates that have got quite different cultures to ourselves, but I think by dint of the hard work, and some of those inspectors are here today, of the work they've done in engaging with other inspectorates, we have a very credible relationship with other inspectorates. And you'll notice, I think we've certainly, for example, do a lot of work with Ministry of Justice, Home Office, DFE, DH. We're always called to the table as equal partners. And certainly Ministry of Justice talked to us last year about raising the profile of health within prisons. We were critical partners in that discussion. We were called alongside HMRP, and they wanted to talk to us separately as well. So we were seen as very important in that dialogue. And finally, just the other comments I made, and Ursula's already made that one of the consequences of our inspections is that we do, agencies in the local area are required to come together to talk to us. And when we go away, without doubt, we've had numerous examples of where agencies have recognised the value of talking to each other, and they continue those conversations after we've left. And I have no doubt that has a significant impact on the way in which services are provided.
Just before opening it up, can I just say that it seems to me that the areas you're working in are in many respects some of the most challenging that we work in. The environment, the fact that the providers, as you say, Ursula, are actually in control of a lot of the factors that get in the way of delivery. My sense, Steve, is that, really to support what Nigel and Ursula both said, that the partnerships that are now involved are working really well. We're not seen as sort of trying to gate crash or we're not in competition with each other. It's now beginning to work extremely well. Is that how you see it?
I see that, absolutely. And it is a great tribute to the team. The environment that they work in, often, particularly if you look at, say, prisons, it's very, very challenging. And I think the team have been, the word spectacular, I think they've been spectacular. And it was really good when we got the staff survey results back, because some of the inspections mean, just like in hospitals actually, people away from home for substantial periods of time, working in the night as well as during the day. And I'm really pleased that we're giving a report to the board now, and you've put them in the open board, because I think we should share that sort of work, because these are very vulnerable people that we are shining a spotlight on their care, and it's the team are doing a great job.
Lewis.
It's really good that this has come to the board. I really think this is up there with the most important work that we do. Partly for the reason Steve's just said, that some of the most vulnerable people in the system, some of the people with previous neglect and high rates of most of the problems, health and social problems that we should be concerned about. So it's really good that you're here. And to see the progress that's been made. I just it would be useful to get a couple of comments from you, though, on one or two issues that you've touched on. And they do, my questions do reflect the collaborative work that your inspections have to be involved in. And so if you take prisons, for example, a very unhealthy environment and psychologically a very unhealthy environment, and yet a very psychologically vulnerable group of people. And what's your impression of the kind of impact that we can have, not just on the direct healthcare where people are receiving sort of clinic appointment and treatment and the issue of escorting is the problem, but on this wider issue of the ethos of institutions. As you know, I went to a prison recently, and it's just a reminder of the environment and the way that the environment can have an impact on people's health. And we just would not accept in health the environment in which vulnerable, psychologically damaged people are looked after in prisons. And although these aren't necessarily healthcare facilities, although they're not great either, these are vulnerable people in institutional care, looked after essentially by the state. And I just wonder whether we are able, as the healthcare inspector, to have that influence on the wider system. And just very quickly, I've got a second point. That's okay. And it's the point you made about case descriptions. I think it's a really good point about young people, say young people in care, for example, people who spend time in secure settings and then emerge into the outside world. Because those people move between a host of different services, carrying their vulnerability with them and all the potential for things to go wrong. And I just wonder whether there's any way in which we can highlight what happens to those people. They seem to be a really good example of what we're trying to do now, which is understand the pathway that people are on, the movement of people between services, not just look at the individual service. Those are the people you might start with if you were taking that approach. And I just wonder whether we should be doing more about what you're finding for those young people.
So I think in terms of the wider system issues, particularly in relation to prisons, but also in terms of relation to children's services, I think we have had and will have more impact on 2 or 3 different levels. So the first one, and I hope Jan will nod, Fuchs Baer is our inspection manager for the Health and Justice team. The HMIP has recently introduced a new framework for their own assessment, where health services fit within the respect domain, but also under the Healthy Prisons policy. And I think we had a lot of input, but in how the HMIP themselves thought about that domain and the issues in relation to the healthy prison environment, as well as the issues about specific health services. And I think we are continuing to push on that open door of how it is that we get, how we might have a greater role in assisting with the assessment and evaluation of some of those wider health, particularly some of the public health and well-being aspects within the prison service. And that's certainly what we will be discussing with Her Majesty's Inspectors of Prisons in our annual review meeting. And it's one of the reasons why we think it's so important that our inspectors continue to have free rein across the prison estate, and so that they're not just confined to being escorted to the health block and escorted out of the health block. We've had conversations about the risk of that in terms of our inspectors being key carrying through the estate, but on balance, we think that's absolutely the right thing to do, because it gives us the ability to comment, and working with the dedicated health inspectors from HMIP into those assessments. I think the second thing is the work that we've done within some of the thematic reviews, which again pulls that together and seeks to create a bigger narrative and put that narrative up into policy. And secondarily, I think we're particularly pleased that 2 or 3 really important strategic issues have now been picked up. So in 2007, there was a report from the Health Select Committee that advised that the prisons should do particular work on the prospect of older people within the prison estate, which at that point was completely rejected. I went 2 weeks ago now to the first MOJ steering group on how we are going to care and support older people in the prison estate, and that includes the physical environment, but is allowing us to discuss dementia care and a wide range of health and wellbeing issues around older prisons, and we're doing a thematic review of social care within prison and the operation of the Care Act. And I'm also part of work with NHS England, where we've got some dedicated people working together on the care and support of people with learning disabilities and difficulties, who are another vulnerable population, and where I had exactly that conversation at the steering group last week, where I thought that case tracking methodology would be particularly powerful at looking at how perhaps some of those individuals, the opportunities that were missed earlier in their life and when they were children and young people, that meant that they got into the prison estate. And certainly we've had that conversation in the context of the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services thematic review, which you also know that we're doing, about what is it, particularly in terms of the equalities and inequalities agenda, that mean that some people will end up in the justice system and some people will end up in a Tier 4 secure bed. And sometimes it's the issues of background and a range of other things around opportunities that distinguish what happens to a distressed 14 or 15-year-old that is beginning to exhibit difficulties about whether that's regarded as illness or delinquency.
Great, thank you. I'm going to bring this to an end, not because it's not really interesting, but we are so late. But I think you would have picked up from what Lewis said, and certainly from what I think, this is such an important area and a very difficult environment for our people. And I just like to echo, I think the whole board's thanks to your staff collectively for all that they do. So thank you very much indeed, everybody.
These are 2 of us.
And yeah, I was going to say, people I know sitting there. So thank you. Lewis, a challenge for you. I don't know if you ever listened to Just a Minute, but you have 1 minute without hesitation, repetition or deviation to brief the board on last night's RGC committee.
Okay, 2 topics. One was mental health. We heard about the inspection programme, where a third of mental health trusts have been rated requires improvement or inadequate, mostly requires improvement. 2/3 have been rated good or outstanding, mostly good. And subsequently, on re-inspection, to pick up the point we discussed briefly earlier, there's a reasonable improvement story, where of the requires improvement trusts, about 3/4 have improved on re-inspection. So a positive sort of positive anyway, overall message about where mental health inspection is going and the improvement that it might be triggering. There are some other concerns. There are some thematic reviews at the moment on CAMS. There's another one on the Mental Health Act and the rising use of Mental Health Act powers. And Paul Elliott, who is the Deputy Chief Inspector who oversees our mental health inspections, had some other themes for future work, very sensitive areas which he's planning to explore: sexual safety, physical restraint, long-term rehabilitation wards, and so on. So a very forward-looking, positive account of where mental health has got to. Second theme of the meeting was actually a report, an interim report really, of an internal investigation, an incident that was raising questions about some of CQC's approach, particularly on the issue of fit and proper person regulations. So there was a discussion about that. I think it's fair to say it's incomplete, and so we come back to it at a later time. But it was raising questions for us about how we apply the fit and proper person regulation, whether it's doing exactly what we want it to do, and therefore whether we might have a view on its future. But also on our own investigative process. Do we, when something happens, an incident happens, and we're concerned about the implications for how we work, do we have a proper process for initiating an incident, for reporting it, for the governance of the learning, and so on? And what came out of that incident review was, in particular, that we ourselves need an incident investigative process which is a little bit more formal, a little bit clearer for people. And although the meeting didn't conclude on that, we are expecting to receive a further report on how that might go.
Thank you, Lewis. It was a very good meeting yesterday. Is there any other business that the board wanted to raise? Great. So I think that is that. Mr. Ward, I hope you think you've had a pretty thorough answer to your question. I hope you also got a copy of the letter that I sent you in answer to your question from the previous board meeting. I've not got any other questions from members of the public who are actually here. So with that, running very late, we finish the meeting. Thank you very much indeed.